I thought my wheelchair ramp would give me freedom, but for Karen, it was an eyesore that needed to go. After a life-changing accident, I installed a fully legal ADA-compliant ramp at my front door. But that wasn't good enough for HOA Karen, who claimed it violated community guidelines. She fined me, threatened me, and even sent contractors to remove it without my permission. But Karen had no idea who she was messing with. I wasn't just another homeowner. I had powerful connections, and I knew exactly how to take her down. What started as a petty HOA dispute quickly spiraled into the biggest mistake of her life. Watch until the end, because you won't believe Karen's final meltdown when she realized who she was up against. Like, subscribe, and comment if you've ever had an HOA overstep their boundaries. I want to hear your stories. I never thought my own home would become a battleground, but the moment I installed my wheelchair ramp, Karen made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. It all started with a bright orange notice slapped onto my door, practically screaming at me in bold red letters. Notice of violation, unapproved structure. The HOA has strict guidelines regarding modifications to home exteriors. Your wheelchair ramp is not compliant with community aesthetics and must be removed within 14 days. I crumpled the letter in my fist, furious. My wheelchair ramp wasn't some random addition. I had installed it after a serious accident left me unable to walk without assistance. The ramp was fully legal, built to ADA standards, and had every permit approved by the city. So why was Karen, our power-hungry HOA president, trying to bully me into removing it? The next morning, I stepped outside and immediately noticed Karen standing across the street. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, she was watching my house like a hawk. I decided to confront her. "Morning, Karen. Something I can help you with?" She flashed a tight, fake smile. "Oh, just doing my duty as HOA president. I see you got the notice. I assume you'll be making arrangements to take it down." I shook my head. "That ramp is staying exactly where it is. It's legally installed, and I have the permits to prove it." Karen's smile vanished. "Our HOA has rules, and I suggest you follow them." I took a step closer. "And I suggest you read the law. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects me from being forced to remove necessary modifications like this." Karen crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see about that." Within days, Karen turned my life into a bureaucratic nightmare. I started receiving daily fines for non-compliance. She emailed the entire HOA board, claiming I was refusing to respect community standards. She even sent landscapers to my house, demanding they remove the unauthorized structure. They refused, thank God. It was infuriating, but I wasn't about to back down. What Karen didn't know, I wasn't just any homeowner. I had powerful connections, and I was about to make her regret ever targeting me. The harassment didn't stop. Every morning, I woke up to yet another fine, another warning, another letter from the HOA demanding that I remove my wheelchair ramp. Karen was relentless. It was clear that she wasn't just enforcing rules, she was making this personal. A few days later, as I rolled out onto my porch, I noticed something new. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Karen was standing in front of them, gesturing towards my house like a tour guide explaining a crime scene. I wheeled myself closer, listening in. "This is exactly the kind of thing that brings property values down," she was saying, shaking her head in disapproval. "We have rules for a reason, and when people start thinking they can ignore them, the entire community suffers." One of my neighbors, Mrs. Delgado, spoke up. "But he needs the ramp, Karen. It's not like it's just for decoration." Karen sighed dramatically. "It's not about need, it's about compliance. If we make an exception here, where does it stop? What if someone else decides they want to install a giant statue on their front lawn? Rules exist to keep our neighborhood looking uniform and respectable." I'd heard enough. I rolled forward and cleared my throat. "Karen, do you have a problem with disabled people, or is it just me?" The group turned to look at me, and for the first time, Karen seemed caught off guard. She quickly regained her composure. "This isn't personal," she said, flashing that fake smile. "I'm just enforcing OA guidelines." I pulled a folder from my lap and held it up. "Then maybe you'd like to explain why your guidelines contradict federal law? Because according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, this ramp is fully protected. If you keep pushing this, you're not just going to be dealing with me, you're going to be dealing with the law." Karen's face twitched. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another voice spoke up. He's right. I turned to see Mr. Campbell, one of the older residents, stepping forward. I used to be a contractor. ADA regulations override HOA rules. You can't force someone to take down an accessibility modification. The group murmured in agreement. Karen's smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a look of growing frustration. Well, she said stiffly, this is something the board will have to review. The crowd slowly dispersed, and Karen stalked off without another word. But I knew this wasn't over. She wouldn't stop until she found a way to win. Later that evening, I installed a security camera above my front door. Something told me I was going to need it. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No new fines, no notices, no passive-aggressive emails from the HOA. It almost felt like Karen had finally backed off. But I knew better. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. A motion alert from my security camera. My stomach tightened as I opened the app, and sure enough, there she was. Karen, in the middle of the night, standing on my porch. She looked around, making sure no one was watching, then pulled something out of her bag. A can of spray paint. My ramp. She was defacing my wheelchair ramp. I watched in real time as she shook the can, then bent down and sprayed something across the base of the ramp. She stepped back, admiring her work, then disappeared into the night like a coward. I rolled out first thing in the morning, heart pounding with anger. The words "rule breaker" were scrawled in bright red paint across the base of my ramp. That was it. She had crossed the line. I took photos from every angle, made copies of the security footage, and compiled a detailed report. If Karen thought she could intimidate me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The first thing I did was file a police report. Vandalism. Destruction of property. I handed them the footage, and they assured me they'd be paying Karen a visit soon. The next stop was the city's housing authority. I provided them with everything: the fines, the harassment, the threats, the blatant violation of disability rights laws. The official I spoke to didn't just take it seriously, he was furious. This is a direct violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, he told me. Not only is she in legal trouble, but the entire HOA could be held liable for this. We're escalating this immediately. Good. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I attended the next HOA meeting. The room was full, neighbors chatting, Karen sitting in her usual spot at the head of the table, looking smug. She didn't know what was coming. When it was time for open concerns, I wheeled to the front and pulled up the security footage on my laptop. I turned the screen toward the entire room. Karen, would you like to explain this? The room fell silent. Karen's smile faded. The footage showed her, clear as day, vandalizing my property. A few people gasped. This, I continued, is your HOA president. The same person who claims to care about neighborhood aesthetics is the same person sneaking onto private property in the middle of the night to commit vandalism. And in case you're wondering, I've already filed a police report and sent this to the city authorities. They'll be investigating whether the HOA itself should be held responsible for her actions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Another neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, stood up. I knew Karen was bad, but this is disgusting. Karen's face had turned red. This is ridiculous, she stammered. That footage is doctored. This is a smear campaign. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because the police didn't seem to think so when they came to my house this morning. That was it. The room erupted. Board members turned to each other, whispering furiously. A few members of the audience started shouting at Karen, demanding answers. Even some of her longtime supporters looked sickened. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a power-hungry HOA president who had finally been exposed. One of the board members stood up. We need to discuss immediate disciplinary action. I folded my arms, watching Karen's entire world unravel before her eyes. This fight wasn't over yet, but one thing was clear: Karen had finally lost control. The fallout from the meeting was immediate. Karen had spent years ruling over the HOA like a dictator, but after the security footage played, her power crumbled in real time. People were furious. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out against her suddenly found their voices. The HOA board went into an emergency discussion right then and there. Karen tried to argue, tried to control the narrative, but it was useless. The board wasn't just angry about the vandalism, they were terrified of the legal consequences. If the city's housing authority or the ADA office pursued a case against the HOA, it could mean massive fines, lawsuits, even government intervention in the way the neighborhood was managed. After 20 minutes behind closed doors, the board returned, and the president, Mr. Patterson, looked exhausted as he stood at the podium. "We have voted," he said, clearing his throat. "Karen Mitchell is hereby removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately." The room exploded into applause. Karen shot to her feet. "You can't do this. I built this HOA. I've done more for this neighborhood than anyone else. You're making a huge mistake." Patterson held up a hand. "No, Karen, you made the mistake. You let your personal vendetta put the entire HOA at risk." He turned to face me. "On behalf of the board, I apologize for what you've been put through. And if you choose to pursue legal action, we will cooperate fully." I nodded, trying to suppress my smirk. "I appreciate that." Karen stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard that one of the picture frames on the wall rattled. The meeting ended shortly after, and as I rolled out into the parking lot, neighbors approached me one by one, people I had barely spoken to before. "I had no idea she was that bad," Mrs. Delgado said, shaking her head. "She fined me last year for having the wrong color patio furniture," another woman muttered. "She tried to control everything. She made me take down my daughter's basketball hoop because it was too visible from the street," one man added. Karen had ruled through intimidation, and now that she was gone, people were finally speaking up. But I wasn't done yet. I'd already met with the city housing authority, and they were investigating whether Karen had misused HOA funds. If she had, which, given her history, wouldn't be surprising, she was looking at criminal charges. As I rolled into my driveway later that night, I took a deep breath and looked at my wheelchair ramp. The red spray paint had already been washed off by some kind neighbors while I was at the meeting. Karen had fought tooth and nail to try and erase that ramp, to erase my independence, but in the end, she was the one who got erased. And I had a feeling I'd never hear from her again. And that's how I took down Karen and got my justice. She thought she could bully me, intimidate me, and even destroy my property, but in the end, she lost everything, her power, her reputation, and maybe even her freedom if the investigation goes the way I think it will. If you've ever had to deal with a Karen or an HOA on a power trip, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it. Like this video if you love seeing HOA Karens get what they deserve, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.